Hello everybody, my name is John Grant and I'm one of the associate pastors at Bethel Church in Oldbury, and a big welcome to you wherever you are watching this and whatever time you're watching this. We're continuing with our I Am series, statements that Jesus made about himself. And all of the I Am statements are taken from John's Gospel, and so far we have looked at I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the door, I am the good shepherd. And this week we'll be looking at Jesus' statement in John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. And it's the famous story about Lazarus. And as with all of the other I am sayings, I am the resurrection and the life occurs in close proximity to a miracle that was performed by Jesus. And the resurrection of Lazarus is the only one of its kind, and it's only recorded in the book of John. As with other physical miracles and I am sayings, this spectacular moment points beyond the event itself. It has such a wider meaning. Today I'm in a different location as I usually would film, and there's a prize for those that can guess where I am today. And the prize is a holiday for two in Barbados, paid for by Bethel Church, which is great. Unfortunately, I'm not sure, is that a green, red or amber location, so we're not sure if we can go ahead, but hey ho, worth entering the competition anyway. But yes, I'm in a different location and I thought this was fitting for the first section of my talk today. And I conduct 2 or 3 funerals a week, and it's been a very challenging time for many over this period of time. I conduct funerals for a wide variety of people. I recently conducted a biker's funeral where over 400 bikers followed a Harley Davidson bike and sidecar that had been converted into a hearse. It was quite an incredible experience. Also conducted a funeral for someone who was a big fan of the band Madness, and I had to wear a Madness hat and sunglasses throughout the service. You know, funerals should always reflect the person, and people that conduct funerals need to remain and be flexible. A local minister I once know, or I still know, was asked to conduct a funeral for a pet rabbit. And this story made the local news. And this reminds me of another sad but true story regarding a neighbour's rabbit. And after a long day at the office, Chris came home one day to find his dog with the neighbour's pet rabbit in his mouth. The rabbit was obviously dead, and Chris panicked. If my neighbours find out my dog killed their bunny, they'll hate me forever, he thought. So he took the dirty, chewed up rabbit into the house, gave it a bath and blow-dried its fur. Chris knew his neighbours kept their back door open during the summer, so he snuck inside and put the cleaned up rabbit back into the cage, hoping his neighbours would think it just died of natural causes. A couple of days later, Chris and his neighbours saw each other outside, and they said, "Did you hear that Fluffy died?" the neighbour asked. Yeah, sorry to hear about that. What happened?" Chris mumbled. And the neighbour replied, "We just found him dead in his cage one day. But the strange thing is that the day after we buried him, we went out to dinner and someone must have dug him up, gave him a bath and put him back in the cage." Great story. But you know, raising the dead is something only God is capable of. Jesus raises the dead because he is the resurrection and the life. He doesn't only just give resurrection and life, he is resurrection and life. He is our ultimate hope. And you know, D.L. Moody said this great phrase, when Jesus was around, he spoilt every funeral he attended. So back to the story of Lazarus. Lazarus means God has helped. Past tense, already done. To have a name that in hindsight is a prophecy is remarkable. His patients named him long before he needed Jesus to restore his life. His name gives us all hope today. How amazing that we can have hope before we even have a need. So I'm going to read the story of Lazarus, a great story from John 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed there. He was there for 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake I am glad I am not there, so that you may believe. But let us now go to him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And then in verse 35 it says, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how much he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have not kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odour. He has been in there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you will always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." What an amazing story. All of this experience would have been a pretty scary sight. The Bible passage states that the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Sounds like something out of a horror movie, doesn't it? And Jesus then said, "Go, take off the grave clothes and let him go." So you can imagine this revealing of Lazarus, someone who's been dead for so long, and people expecting this horror show, and yet this person who's been raised from the dead. Incredible story. So what are some of the lessons we have learned from the stories of Lazarus, and how do we receive these words of Jesus in this I am statement? I am the resurrection and the life. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. We hear about that in verse 17, and that's pretty late to be attending a funeral, isn't it? Now, I must admit, On a couple of occasions I have been late in attending a funeral that I'm supposed to conduct, down to traffic, honestly. That is the honest answer, but it's a horrible experience and a horrible feeling. And Jesus, 4 days, that's pretty late to be turning up, isn't it? And the theologian R.C. Sproul writes, the fact that Lazarus had been buried for 4 days seems like an insignificant detail, but it helps us get at the reason for Jesus' delay in going to Bethany. Among the rabbinic teachings in Jesus' day was the idea that a person died, the person's spirit hovered over the body for 3 days, and if somehow the body was resuscitated, the spirit would return to it. But according to the rabbinic tradition, the spirit departed after 3 days, and the body was beyond all hope of resuscitation at that point. It's interesting, isn't it? And you wonder, in the light of this teaching, it seems likely that Jesus wanted to get to Bethany after that 3 days had passed, so that once he'd raised Lazarus from the grave, the Jewish authorities could not say Lazarus' spirit had been lingering and his body had merely been resuscitated. Jesus wanted to prove a point that he is the resurrection and the life. By delaying his return, Jesus let enough time pass to make sure it wasn't just a natural phenomenon, but actually it was a miracle that people were about to witness. The family of siblings had spent a lot of time with Jesus and had seen him perform all kinds of miracles. So when Martha sees Jesus finally arriving, she proclaims that if only he had arrived a bit sooner, her brother wouldn't have died. And for Mary and Martha, Jesus had arrived too late and the hope had gone. Yet God, as we know, works outside of time and logic. So often situations happen in our lives that we don't understand. And yet God calls us to trust him. God is working out the plans for our lives and our purposes. Often God works in the waiting, and we must let go sometimes and trust God with his timing, not our timing. And that's a big challenge. In John 12 verse 24, Jesus refers to his own death, saying, I assure you and most solemnly say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls from the earth into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain and yields an amazing harvest. God is calling us daily and in seasons of our lives to die to self, surrender our all to him. Then we will receive so much more than what we have clung so tightly onto. We will receive new life, new purpose and new direction if we're willing to let go. Another incredible point is where we see Jesus' emotions. And Jesus identifies with us in our pain and loss. You know, this is the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35. Jesus wept. He comes to us in our weakness and brokenness. And though he knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, Jesus still wept when he saw the tears of Mary and her companions. And this is Jesus being truly human. Jesus joins his friend's sadness with heartfelt sorrow, yet underlying it is the knowledge that resurrection and joy will soon follow. Jesus' example shows that heartfelt mourning in the face of death does not indicate lack of faith, but honest sorrow at the reality of suffering and death. When we feel pain and heartache, we can feel so alone. Maybe you're able to sympathise with Martha, who can't understand how Jesus could let this happen. Why couldn't Jesus have come sooner? Why couldn't have Jesus stepped in? And I'm sure we often say that, don't we, in our mind? Jesus, why? Why didn't you do this? Why couldn't you have done it this way, my way? Yet what we see in this story isn't Jesus arriving late and distracted by other people and things. Instead, Jesus walks with Mary and Martha in their pain and expresses the very human emotion of weeping with them. I love this quote. I'm not sure where it's from, but I can really resonate with this, and hopefully you too. Jesus was fully human and fully God. He cried. He knew Lazarus was dead before he got the news, but he still cried. He knew Lazarus would be alive again in a matter of moments, but still he cried. He knew this world was not his home. He knew death here is not forever. He knew eternity in the kingdom better than anyone else could, and still he cried. Because this world is full of pain and regret and loss and depression and disappointment. He cried because knowing the end of the story doesn't mean you can't cry at the sad parts. You know, we have to be honest with ourselves, with each other, so often, don't we? It's okay to be upset. It's okay to cry when things don't go the way that is planned, when we struggle. Even that we know this incredible truth that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, it's still okay to be sad when we face loss and sadness in our lives. And when difficult times come, we can so easily become distracted with our own emotions, yet we have this privilege of turning to a God who not only takes the time to comfort us, but who stands right with us, feeling the pain we feel. When Jesus raised Lazarus from the grave, he displayed to all the hope we can have in trusting someone capable of overcoming anything we face. But his words in verse 25 give us so much more. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die." And Jesus does the impossible and raises Lazarus from the grave. But Lazarus at some point would have died eventually, like all of us. And you know, Jesus was not just talking about in this scripture, this famous I am statement. Jesus was not just talking about the present. He was obviously talking about the future too, a future hope. Jesus raises the dead because he is the resurrection. Jesus not only gives resurrection and life, he is resurrection and life. Isn't that amazing? Jesus is the only one capable of raising the dead, but also the only one capable of defeating death himself. The only one who offers a true and ultimate hope. Today, this week, Jesus is saying to all of us, I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus wants us to rise up, to become fully alive in him. He's calling us out of our tombs. The tombs might represent, your tomb might represent many things, different to others. Could be life, situations, regret, circumstances, the past. Anything that's left you in a dark place, making you feel dead inside. And to each of us he says, take away the stone. And maybe like Martha we cry out, no, it's too dirty, it smells too bad. Maybe you don't want all of your sin, failings to be exposed. Things come to the surface that are not particularly nice when God puts his finger on things in our lives. But Jesus calls us all by name. And like he said to Lazarus, come out, be fully alive. The story of Lazarus is the story of each one of us. It is the revelation that Jesus came to call us to rise up, to come out, to be alive, to be a new creation. This resurrection is a process that begins every morning, every night, every day. And we are called on a journey of resurrection to do the work of God, to bring love into our families, our communities and the world, because he is the resurrection and the life. Amen.